Show, Thursday, November 14th. Dave Loughran, Sal Vetri, and of course our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, home of the $200,000 NFL baller. Of course, some monster, or let's say monster, not compared to these other sites, but some quality NBA contests as well. Last night was the 30K baller, 5K to first. We got the 25K baller, 5K to first today, $10 to enter. Of course, you now have CSV uploads and edits on Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, and you get your $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points simply by signing up through us at awesemo.com. YSRPs, baby, good as cash. Use it to play and win money on the site, and then withdraw it if you'd please. Go to the NFL tab. Click on any of the free articles, particularly the showdown ones. You'll see the link right at the top. Click that. Use the sign-up code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. Get your $30 in YSRPs when you deposit. Actually, we will throw the link in the YouTube chat as well, so keep an eye out for that. You'll see the link. It'll take you straight to the article, and then the Yahoo link is right at the top. Unfortunately, we can't put the actual Yahoo link in the NBA chat or the YouTube chat. We would happily do that if we could, but get your $30 in YSRPs. And check out the lobby. Sometimes you get some management-free contests where everything paid into the contest by the player gets paid back out. And, of course, far less sharks on Yahoo than you'd find on DraftKings or FanDuel. That is Yahoo. Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the Strategy Show. Sal Vetri, how we doing, bro?
We're doing good, man. We're doing good. Excited to break this slate down with you.
All right. So let's go ahead and dive right into it, starting with some injuries. Anything big right now that stands out to you is something we've got to monitor. Basically the same question I asked you on Tuesday, but now we've actually got some injury news, participation in practice from Wednesday or lack thereof, and a couple big names right now seeming to have their statuses in doubt.
Yeah, I think we need to watch. One of the ones that stands out to me just looking at this before we got on was just George Kittle, originally being ruled out by his coach and now potentially saying he's unlikely to play. So it goes from doubtful to questionable or out to questionable. So it doesn't seem like he's going to play for a really good matchup for him against Arizona. So that's one of the big ones that I've been monitoring. All the running back injuries since Tuesday have gotten a little bit more clear. Doesn't seem like Ty Johnson will play. Definitely doesn't seem like Devontae Freeman is going to play. Devonta Freeman. So just more clarity around those backfields as we've gone on. There's some injuries with D.D. Westbrook we want to monitor as we continue to go. It seems like Nick Foles should be back under center. So some of the bigger ones on the offensive side of the ball for sure.
All right. Pop it off here with the Detroit Lions at home against the Dallas Cowboys. You know, earlier in the week, this game had the highest total on the slate. I think surprising to some, especially given that Matthew Stafford has broken bones in his back. Generally not conducive to putting up a lot of points. First he was day to day, now week to week. It's really hard to say, but still the highest total. Hold on. Dante says, turn your volume up a little bit. All right, let me see what I can do for you here. Let me see if we can help out. Do me a favor.
Yeah,
talk.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. I may have turned my main mix down a little bit. Here we go. Right. Let's see if this makes a difference. Hello. Yeah, that should be good. All right, so the highest total on this slate. The only higher total is the 8 p.m. It's a primetime game between the Chiefs and the Chargers. But yeah, you got a 27.5 total for the Cowboys, 24.5 for the Lions, 51.5 over under, and a 3-point spread. Pretty interesting for sure, knowing that Matthew Stafford's probably unlikely to play. And then you've got Jeff Driscoll here. So, yeah, I mean, both teams have pretty high totals in Detroit.
Yeah, they do. And I think just starting on the Detroit side of the ball, it's rather interesting to see that, and seeing them as just a small underdog in this one pretty much puts everybody on the table. I think as a cop car comes by here, I think that the person who stands out the most is probably J.D. McKissick. You can argue that Paul Perkins, who's been cut in a matter of like 3 weeks by every team he's been playing on in his career, will get some of the snaps, but McKissick played 70% of the snaps the last time out. He's sort of the pivot off of what seems like right now a chalkier, still picking up ownership, but not nearly as much as Brian Hill's ownership right now. And I mean, game script wise, it sets up nicely for McKissick, who is a pass catching running back in his career, has been pretty consistent in terms of catching 2 balls per game that he plays. And we know J.D. McKissick has never really been a starter, so he's going to see starter snaps now. I can project him pretty comfortably for about 3 receptions here. So he's the one who stands out the most from Detroit. Just really tough to pay price tags of Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay, with Driscoll being the quarterback there. It's really just McKissick and run back options. But I do like Dallas as a stack. I mean, you see the high total, you see a close game. It's going to at least make Dak continue to throw. I think Amari's in a really good matchup, even with Darius Slay this season. Slay's been good against wide receivers, but he shadowed Zay Jones, MBS, and Keenan Allen. So I think Amari's just going to be his toughest task yet. Allen caught 6 balls for 81 yards against him. Michael Gallup will get the better matchup against Rashawn Melvin, who has 111 pass rating against. So yeah, I really like the Dallas stacks here. McKissick seems like a very decent correlation run back option.
Yeah, McKissick, to me, you're going to be hard pressed not to have some interest in this guy. He played 70% of snaps last week. Ty Johnson played 14. So they are really going to be limited at the position. They continue to take hits at running back. Johnson didn't practice yesterday with that concussion. I've got him projected out right now. I mean, would it be a surprise to you if McKissick played like 75, 80% of snaps?
No, it wouldn't. I mean, I would think he would play somewhere around 70% again, unless they sign somebody. Just the way that this game is going to go, it sets up nicely for him to stay on the field. It's a guy that in 28 career games has 55 receptions as primarily a backup, and Dallas allows the 6th most receptions running backs this year. So it just really sets up nicely for his skill set. And yeah, if he was like 20% owned, I wouldn't be as highly confident in him, but he's less than half the ownership as a guy like Brian Hill on this slate. And I think they set up rather similarly, if not better, for McKissick's game flow.
What about the Dallas side? I mean, you've got Ezekiel Elliott, who I've talked about this all week. I think at that price tag, you could really make an argument that he's overpriced, given the price of some other running backs beneath him. That's not to say that he doesn't have some value here against the Detroit team that has shown some obvious flaws in the in their run defense, but it is a price that makes him a little bit tougher to get to, especially when McCaffrey, of course, is expensive, but he's just far and away the best running back, really the best fantasy contributor in the game. But yeah, the Lions rank bottom 5 in run defense grade according to Pro Football Focus. They're 20th according to Football Outsiders. So it has been a struggle there. Does Ezekiel Elliott warrant attention here at his price?
Yeah, I think he does, depending on your lineup constructions. I don't see myself getting there as much, but you're getting Ezekiel Elliott as a contrarian play this week in single-digit ownership projections right now. So, yeah, as a favorite here against a banged up and getting healthier, though, Mike Daniels came back last week. The Detroit defensive line, which we saw that kind of just stop and shut down anything David Montgomery was having for right around a 3-yard per carry day. So I don't have a ton of interest in Zeke just because of the way I'm building lineups this week. But I think at 7% in GPPs, if you're somebody who's already not getting to McCaffrey and you're just building your lineups a different way, he's surely viable. And at that ownership, he's a very good contrarian play based on his skill set and the way the game sets up. I'm just going to be getting to McCaffrey in some different constructions. Right now, I'm not getting to too much of Zeke, but it's nothing to do with where he really is. It's just relative to other players I like more.
How are you feeling about game stacks here? Like a Dak Amari Cobb or Dak Amari Gallup stack, running it back with McKissick or running it back with Golladay or Jones. Again, the total in this game is higher than I thought it would be. It's 51.5, and both teams projected to put points on the board, despite one of them likely running out a backup quarterback. Does that pique your interest in guys like Prescott and the passing and the pass catching weapons here?
Yeah, it does. Dak's price is up there a little bit, but I get to him mainly when I do stacks here. I like Amari. He's torched Jair Alexander, Xavier Howard, some top cornerbacks in the league this year. So I'm not really concerned about the matchup versus Slay, who's been okay in his matchups, but hasn't really had he struggled against Keenan Allen a little bit and hasn't really had another wide receiver that's been that type of caliber as Amari to face this season. So I like Amari stacking. And then, yeah, I feel really good about Gallup's matchup against Rashawn Melvin. He's given up 502 yards and 3 touchdowns so far this season, and he allows over 16 yards per completion. So that's just a really good matchup for where where Gallup's targets are coming downfield. It lines up with what the cornerback he's going up against is really weak at, and it's just kind of defending those big plays.
Yeah, the more I get throughout the week, the more interest I just have in this game as a whole. I thought the total would drop. It's still up there. And it feels like now ownership, of course, is going to change pretty significantly throughout the week. It always does. We get news, we get more information. But it feels like right now you're probably going to see pretty low ownership on this game, right? Like Maury's at below 10% right now. Gallup is 3%. I'll even throw Randall Cobb in there just to see. He's 5%. Dak is 6%. Ezekiel Elliott, as you mentioned, is 7%. McKissick right now is 11%, which still seems low. I mean, given the total, you would definitely think this would have more ownership, but right now we're not seeing it, and I think that makes it more appealing alone.
Yeah, I think people are scared off maybe by Amari's, one, the price, and then also the matchup by Slay a little bit. Neither scare me, especially if you're going to be stacking it. And then, yeah, Dak's price is just around a lot of other people in terms of the Brees range and the Jameis Winston up there, and some spots where I think other people are just going to lean towards more. So they're all just kind of going unnoticed. And yeah, I think once Ty Johnson is officially ruled out, when it comes, it seems like it's going to happen. McKissick's ownership should come up a little bit, but I think Brian Hill is just really going to hold that down.
Amari Cooper has powered through tough matchups all season long too.
Yeah. He's been, I mean, Michael Thomas has been extremely consistent outside of Cooper's game against the Saints and Lattimore, where he still had like 60 yards. He's been really strong all season.
Let's talk about Atlanta and Carolina. You want to talk about chalk? This is where you're going to get a lot of chalk, right? Brian Hill right now projected for a ton of ownership on DraftKings. Julio Jones, the second highest ownership, highest at his position, second highest overall. Brian Hill, third at his position, but fifth highest overall. Christian McCaffrey, seventh highest player overall. I'll continue. Kyle Allen, 10th. Greg Olsen, 12. Ridley, 13. I mean, it seriously, it continues to go on here. Oh, sorry. DJ Moore, 6th. Literally 7 or 8 players from this game are in the top 20 projected ownership right now. I get it. The prices are reasonable. The game should see plenty of scoring. But, man, this is going to be one of those games. 49.5 total. Panthers 5.5 point home favorites with a 27.5 total. This is one of those games where if it disappoints, it's going to wipe out like half the field.
Yeah, it really is. And like, I like a lot of pieces of this game, like you were just saying, and I just like them a lot less of what their ownership numbers are at. I mean, Julio, Bradbury practiced on Wednesday, so we know Julio is matchup proof, but it's still a really difficult matchup for Julio Jones, and not just for Julio. I mean, Calvin Ridley on the outside, Dante Jackson has been strong this year. We saw Cockrell getting messed up all around last week by Devontae Adams, but he's going to face Calvin Ridley this week. It's not the same person on some rotations. So yeah, where the ownership is right now for the Atlanta side, I'm really not too interested in the Brian Hill ownership. I'd probably come in under it and just outweigh it with more of McKissick in the same price range, who I think has similar upside. More carries will probably come in for Brian Hill, and that's surely going to be the case, but they're still 6-point underdogs, and you have Kenyon Barner out there. Like, you had Brian Hill getting a lot of carries in a game they were leading huge last week. Like, 20 carries is probably not on the table for him unless they flip the script once again as 6-point underdogs. So Kenyon Barner's out there. We'll see if they activate their 5th-round rookie out of Pittsburgh, Olesen. If he gets active, then it really muddies the waters. I would check that on Sunday. That's a big news. If they activate him this season, or for the first time this season, it can affect some things. So where the chalk is on Brian Hill, I think it's a little bit shaky. It doesn't seem like it sets up to be the best of game scripts for him compared to last week where they were leading the entire game.
Yeah, I also think there are some discount running backs in that same tier that are really interesting and currently garnering way less ownership, which should play into your decision making. Look, I still like DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore is a really, really good player. I love the fact that, look, sometimes just the simplest of stats can help you make decisions here. Sometimes you don't need to get into the weeds. He's seen double-digit targets in 3 or 4 weeks. The only week he didn't see it was when he got 9 against San Francisco. And he's seen 8 or more targets in all but 2 games this season, and he's still below 6K on DraftKings. If he had more than 1 touchdown this season, say 4 or 5 touchdowns, DJ Moore would be a $7,500 player right now. Just from a volume standpoint, he's getting a ton of opportunities in Carolina, and we've talked about it. It's a very concentrated offense here. DJ Moore is going to continue to get an abundance of work against an Atlanta secondary that, as we've seen outside of last week, ranks in the bottom 3 or 4 in the entire league in almost every category.
Yeah, and DJ Moore is a priority there. The ownership is following it, but it's fine because he's still too cheap in the 5K range. I was doing just some looking into it a little bit more, and DJ Moore's kind of the air yards that he sees per target and the amount of volume he sees in a game. And it's sort of a sweet spot I was mentioning last week where his air yards aren't too deep down the field, where half the time they're right over the heads of a lot of people. or right over the head of him. It's just right into a spot where it's a high catch percentage, but you're also getting chunk plays. And just looking into comparables, I know they're different players in terms of where they line up, but Chris Godwin has pretty much the exact same air yards per target and volume per game, and he's running similar routes on the season when he's not in the slot. So it's similar comparison. And yeah, you touched on it. If the touchdowns were there for DJ Moore, we'd be talking a lot more about him. He'd be close to a high 6K wide receiver. So he's the priority there just based on the way that he's used in this offense. And he's going to get like Isaiah Oliver in this matchup, which is just a really good spot. And Curtis Samuel is just as good. Like, this is a very easy team to stack. I get why it's highly owned. McCaffrey's going to be popular and all the wide receivers are cheap. And so is Kyle Allen. So I like this spot, even with the ownership on the Carolina side, a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, near 30% market share of air yards as well for DJ Moore, 37% for Curtis Samuel. I mean, there really isn't a whole lot else other than that in terms of taking at least some shots downfield. What about Samuel and Olsen here?
Yeah, Samuel, I still have interest in, probably as just more of a stack and secondary option. He's just too cheap where he's priced at right now. I think he'll also have a really good matchup this week. If Trufant misses again, which he probably will, he'll go up against Wilson, who has, in limited snaps, limited starts, 136 passer rating against, one of the worst ones in the league in a small sample. I'm not too high on Olsen, especially when the ownership follows it. Last week was a really good matchup. The Packers left and right this season. Any quality tight end has had a very good game against the Packers. They just can't cover short crossing routes. Whatever it is, it's their personnel with linebackers and safeties being too slow to the ball. So this is not the same matchup for him. It's still a beneficial matchup against the secondary of Atlanta, but I think a lot of people are going to be point chasing what was a very low key, fantastic matchup last week for him. So if he's going to be popular, if he wasn't popular, I would have interest, but if he's going to be popular at that point, you're just probably more times than not hoping for a touchdown at that ownership. And I think you can get it in similar spots at the tight end position for maybe even cheaper. So I have interest in Samuel. I would rank this McCaffrey, DJ Moore, and Samuel, and I probably won't have as much of Greg Olsen.
I know I won't. If he's going to be as popular as he is. Now, I think it's probably important that we point out how weak the tight end position is. It's bad. I mean, it is really shallow. But at the same time, I feel like you can still find other options at a decent price elsewhere. Of course, though, the matchup comes into play. It's really favorable. So I'll have Olsen. I just don't see myself having nearly as much as the field. Anything else from this game?
No, that's all. Yeah. Like, Olsen's still running a ton of routes, but exactly the ownership thing is the main reason for concern. So nothing else from here.
Jacksonville, Indianapolis. Nick Foles expected back. Been a while, and he's getting that job back, wrestling it away from Gardner Minshew, who clearly fizzled out over the past several weeks. Was decent, though. I mean, it could have been a whole lot worse. 43.5 total. Colts are 3-point favorites, 23.3 total, 20.3 for the Jags. So you're not expecting a high scoring game here. As a matter of fact, only a few games have totals that are lower. This is in the middle, but I guess it's because there aren't many games with that high of totals either this week. LeGarrette Blount. I tell you what, for some reason, I always think of Fournette and Blount. They're totally different players, but for some reason the name messes with my head. Leonard Fournette is a monster workload player. He's going to continue to get 20 plus opportunities almost every week. Last week was different, or 2 weeks ago in London they played from behind the entirety of that game. But you look at games that are even somewhat competitive, and he's getting around 20 carries, 22 carries, plus 6 or so opportunities in the passing game. I think his price is reasonable here for a guy that gets so much work from week to week.
Yeah, I think his price is reasonable too. And yeah, it's the same story with Leonard Fournette here. It's just a player who's going to have a ton of volume and not be efficient for the most part. I mean, he faces 36% 8-man boxes, which is the third highest on the slate. So a lot of it's just not his fault. People stack the box against Gardner Minshew because Minshew is very much or was not at that point just being able to take control of the ball, and people weren't scared of him. Now he's out of there, so maybe less 8-man boxes, but 23% stuff rate, 40% success rate. All these numbers are not good for Fournette, but we know he's seeing 25 opportunities a game, 6 targets per game. So where the price point is on him, it's still probably a little bit too cheap. I do like Fournette again this week. I'm a little bit more interested in some of the passing game. By the way,
I'm sorry. Let me real quick. He's also second in the entire league in yards per contact after attempt. So even when they've got these 8-man fronts, like, he's still outside of Derrick Henry. Nobody is averaging more yards after contact per attempt. So he's been pretty good in that respect.
Yeah, and that's good to point out just in terms of being able to like create for himself still and actually break tackles. So yeah, he's the guy at his price point that I think is underpriced. I'll have interest in him. I don't know how much of a priority he'll be. It seems like a lot of my lineups are up for McCaffrey or just down to the 5 and 6K range. But I think he falls in an interesting spot where this seems to be the first week where his ownership is average instead of spiking up to the top as of right now. And again, you're waiting on touchdowns from this guy that we have yet to see. So if you think that volume is going to translate to that, it's going to have to happen soon, or maybe it just won't happen at this point. But he's definitely seeing 25 opportunities a game. You're likely that he's going to see a touchdown here or there over the next couple of weeks.
Do you have interest in Shark or Westbrook in terms of priorities?
Yeah, so none are priorities. I like D.D. Westbrook coming out of the slot here, potentially if he's healthy. He's just seeing a ton of yards after contact or after the catch right now. And that's huge for him as a guy who just has low ADOT. He's going to survive off of a lot of targets, so it's not a priority for me as much as a value play. And I'm not going to get to too much of Shark, but not a priority by any means, more of a GPP dart type of throw. But Chris Conley is a guy who in the preseason with Foles, everybody just remembers D.D. Westbrook's really good game. But before that, Conley was getting a lot of hype in camp. And then on the first 2 drives of week 1, he had 3 targets and 2 receptions from Nick Foles before Foles got hurt. So it's a super small sample, and the preseason is shaky to go off of. But at that type of a price point, if you're just looking for a GPP flyer at really low ownership, I imagine no ownership, I actually prefer Conley to Shark this week, not in terms of overall raw points more times than not, but just ownership and just sort of a sneakier type of play.
Okay. What about the Colts? Marlon Mack, another guy who's seen quite a bit of opportunities on the ground, not really involved at all in the passing attack. As a matter of fact, Nyheim Hines was actually pretty involved himself last week, bringing in, I think it was, 43% of the snaps. Marlon Mack only played 46%. But when he's out there, he's generally going to see the ball. Mack struggled to stay efficient a lot too. And of course, having no Jacoby Brissett out there hasn't helped him. But this week, Jacoby Brissett is practicing in full, doesn't have an injury designation, going up against the Jags.
Yeah, so Mack's volume is nice. 19.8 rush attempts per game. It's one of the higher ones on the slate, and he's priced nowhere near that. But the big concern is what you saw last week. And earlier in the year, we saw Mack running more routes, if not double the amount of routes as you were getting out of a guy like Nyheim Hines. And last week, it just completely flopped, and it has been slowly each week. But last week, you saw Hines playing the exact same amount of snaps because they get down 10-0 early. So they're 3-point favorites in this one. So in theory, based on what Vegas is saying, is it should be a fine spot for Mack. He should see his 60+% of the snaps. But I just really am worried about rostering any type of running back like Marlon Mack at a high clip because of the fact if they do get down or things get wonky, he's just going to come right off the field. And now we have a true sample of last week where even in a really good matchup, he's spoiled because his team got down early and he just got pulled off the field. So it's really tough for me to want to get any volume of that type of a player.
Any interest outside of really anyone on this Colts team? For me, I don't have a lot of interest here, especially with T.Y. Hilton unlikely to play.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of interest. Devin Funchess is practicing this week. I don't know if he's going to be able to return. He's 3,500. He's not a guy that I really want to play, but I think he makes things a little bit worse for a guy like Eric Ebron in the red zone at least. So Ebron saw 12 targets last week after sitting down with Frank Wright and saying he wants more involvement in the offense. Maybe that was just a coincidence, but if Funchess is back, it gives me a lot less interest in Ebron. I would prefer Ebron to Doyle at the weak tight end position because he's cheaper now, and we saw some target consistency, especially around the red zone. So I think Doyle's surviving on touchdowns right now, and the price point is up, so no interest there.
Let's talk about Miami and Buffalo. This might be a game that people chase in terms of Buffalo because it's the Miami Dolphins. You see that quite a bit. This is a bad team, so I've got to get some players against them. 41-point total here. Dolphins are 5.5-point dogs at home. I've mentioned to you, I think they cover. I wouldn't be surprised if they win outright, but they have a 17.8 total, 23.3 for the Bills. I just have trouble really falling in love with anyone here. John Brown is not discounted at all. There's no real tight end that you can get to there. Devin Singletary, I think he's a perfectly reasonable tournament play, but at that price, you can't have any confidence in him that he's going to. We've seen it every single week that he's been healthy. There's no rhyme or reason whatsoever when it comes to Sean McDermott and this organization, how they use him. Like Singletary played 67% of snaps last week, 66% the week before. Gore played 33 and 34% respectively. But despite being out there for that much, you saw only 14 total looks, 8 attempts and 6 targets for Devin Singletary, while Frank Gore saw 6 himself. So he's out there. Singletary's out there a ton, but we've seen this more than once this season, Sal, where there will be games where he's literally on the field 2/3 more than Frank Gore and doesn't see the amount of work you'd expect for a running back out there as much as he is.
Yeah, I got some guy doing a leaf blower here, but hopefully it's not impacting this audio.
Huh? You can't hear it.
Perfect. All right. So pretty much, the last 3 weeks, Singletary has played 66% of the snaps to the number. And like you were saying, exactly, it's the way they're using him is not great. He only has 6 more rush attempts than Frank Gore during that time. So even in like a very good matchup, it's still really hard to trust him when his price point is coming up. So are his snaps, but none of his opportunities are coming up. So Singletary is really just a GPP interest for me, but nothing of priority. Where his ownership at right now is fine. Like it's not coming up for this matchup, which we've seen in past weeks, ownership just spike because of the matchup, but he's still in single digits. So yeah, if you want to get to it, that's fine. I don't feel like I have to take a stance on it based on where the ownership is. I'm not really interested in him. And because it's not highly owned or dirt low ownership, it's at 10%. I really don't feel anything about that number. John Brown, it's still a fine spot. He's one of only 2 receivers in the league to have at least 50 yards. I think Michael Thomas is the other one in every single game. So he's been very consistent in terms of if you've been playing him in cash, he's bottom numbers like 10 fantasy points with the upside of scoring a touchdown and getting you 20 plus. He actually has a sneaky difficult matchup against Needham, who since starting in place of Xavier Howard, since he got shut down, has been very good against Demaryius Thomas, so not a really good wide receiver, but 2 catches, 19 yards, and Zach Pascal in his shadow matchup, 2 catches, 26 yards on 7 targets. So they've been using him as a shadow. John Brown's the best receiver out of all those guys. So I think John Brown is the only thing here that stands out for me, but even then I'm a little bit cautious for a more difficult matchup than it seems.
Yeah, I just don't really. The problem too is, like, I haven't seen a very high floor or high ceiling from Josh Allen. He's been okay, but like at that price point, there are many other quarterbacks I'd rather get to. Maybe I have some John Brown as a one-off, but I still don't see that, being a like an obvious spot here. Cole Beasley, you're happy to get 10 or 11 fantasy points from him. And then on the other side, nobody is averaging fewer yards per contact after attempt in the entire league than Kalen Ballage. Actually, it's been so bad that David Johnson is second to last. Of 47 running backs with at least 50 carries, David Johnson's averaging 1.99 yards per contact after attempt. Kalen Ballage, 1.45. Just absolutely dreadful. It doesn't get any better when you start, by the way, talking Pro Football Focus here. It doesn't get any better when you start looking at elusiveness rating. I mean, I could pull up anything and you're going to see very similar numbers from Kalen Ballage. Elusiveness rating, Kalen Ballage, second to last. Believe it or not, David Johnson is last this season. Like I said, I could just keep going with numbers and you'll get the exact same results every single time with Ballage. He's been very, very bad this season in his limited opportunities, Sal.
Yeah, he's been bad, and I just feel like all the leverage, like any piece of content I've done where I've had a question this week or last week on Ballage, I've just ripped the man's name. So I feel like just the big game for Ballage is coming. But yeah, it's not many times you're going to get Miami leading 10-0 in a game like last week where he can actually touch the ball 20 times. And even when he does, and do nothing. And even when he does that, he has a 25% stuff rate, which is the highest on the slate. It's just a brutal spot for him. And really, if anything, you're going to see more of these backup running backs in Gaskin and Layard come out. So no interest in him. Devontae Parker, even if he's not shadowed by Tre'Davious White, who has been in 2 shadow matchups, 3 catches, 27 yards, Odell Beckham, 3 catches, 27 yards, McLaurin. Tre'Davious White has been probably a top 5 cornerback this year, been very good. And especially if he's not used in a shadow, just in zone coverage. So I don't really like anything on Miami. I'll just say Allen Hurns is dirt cheap, and he ran 1 less or 2 less routes, 37 total, than Devontae Parker last week, but it only translated to 2 catches for 32 yards. So it's just Miami here, and a lot of their talent is now shipped out. It's tough to get to in a brutal matchup.
Yeah, Kalen Ballage also dead last in breakaway percentage. You know why? He doesn't have a run of more than 8 yards this year.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, you're relying on like 2 goal line touchdowns to have any upside there, and that's just really tough to rely on Miami to get to the goal line that many times.
Yep. I've liked what I've seen from Devontae Parker, but Tre'Davious White has been spectacular. I don't really see myself getting to the passing game here. Before we move on, any interest in someone like Mike Gesicki?
No interest this week in Gesicki. At least his ownership is down this week, but I just think there's other or better options on the slate.
Okay, Baltimore Houston. This game's a tough one for me to gauge how much I'm looking to get. You've got a 50-point over under. It's the third highest. Actually, sorry, second highest, tied with the Saints and Buccaneers. Ravens are 4.5-point favorites at home. 27.3 total. 22.8 for the Houston Texans. I mean, if you wanted to run naked Lamar Jackson, do it. I mean, I'm never going to tell you not to do that. But unlike last week where I was pretty high on Mark Andrews and Marcus Brown, I just don't see the need to do it this week. Mark Andrews' price has come up. I'm sure Marcus Brown is fine, but I got a little lucky there too because he caught all 4 of his targets for 80 and a touchdown. Now, granted, I mentioned the reason you can like a guy like Brown is because all he needs is a couple. And that's what we saw. We saw a 49-yard reception early in that game, and then I think a 22-yard touchdown reception. So we'll take it. But I'm not huge on Lamar Jackson's pass-catching weapons this week, given what I have around them.
Yeah, and this entire game's at low ownership just for good reason. A lot of the guys are priced up and or appropriately priced when you have a lot of value on the slate. So you're getting single-digit ownership on every single name-worthy player in this entire game. Starting on Houston's side, yeah, I usually love playing Deshaun Watson, but this secondary from the first month of the season for Baltimore to now went from one of the worst to potentially the best in the entire league with Humphrey. Marcus Peters is having one of the best. I mean, this might be rivaling, if not better, a season than he had when he was with Kansas City. So Jimmy Smith is back and healthy. Earl Thomas. It's just really hard to like Deshaun Watson. You have Will Fuller practicing, which helps a little bit in terms of opening up bigger plays and upside, but it's not a spot I want to pay for in this matchup. Same thing for DeAndre Hopkins. When you're getting him at low ownership, you can take stabs on it, but it's not even like he's 7,300 or something and a huge price discount compared to your Michael Thomas. You're getting a big price discount off of Michael Thomas, but you're also getting a huge price discount from DeAndre Hopkins to the Tampa Bay receivers and all those other 7K ones. So it's really hard to get to Hopkins in a matchup, probably against Humphrey. And even when he's not against Humphrey, you've had a really good season out of Marcus Peters. So it's tough to get to Houston. Honestly, the thing that stands out the most from Houston, if JD McKissick picks up more ownership and those 4K guys are getting a lot of ownership, one of the viable pivots, I would say, not somebody I'm crazy about, but Carlos Hyde, 17.7 opportunities per game. Baltimore is exactly middle of the pack, 16th in run defense. Again, not something that I really want to tout too heavily, but it's just a pivot that might open up if some of those other guys get really chalky.
Okay. So from both sides of this one, what do you like and how much would you say you like it? That'd be the best way to put it for this game.
Yeah, it's disgusting, but Carlos Hyde is as a pivot later in the week is the thing that probably stands out the most. I mean, on the other side for Baltimore, Lamar's priced up. Like if you want to get to him, fine. I think there's better options for like $1,000 cheaper. You're paying for the 30+ point ceiling now, and it can surely continue to come out, but a tougher matchup to do it in. And then Andrews is priced up to the point where I'd rather guys who are cheaper. It's really just Carlos Hyde and a little bit of Hollywood Brown. The issue with Hollywood Brown is the guy's only seeing around 6.7 targets per game. Most of his yardage and anything after the catch for him has come after that huge week 1 game. If you look at it since then, he catches balls and he pretty much drops after that. And yeah, last week caught all 4 of his targets. So he's relying on very little volume. Lamar Jackson usually doesn't throw that often or that much. So in his price range is just other guys. It's almost a wash for me outside of a little bit of Hollywood interest and Carlos Hyde pivot potential.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we need to spend a whole lot more time on this one, surprisingly. But like I said, you ever want to get to Lamar Jackson, Sal, I think you'd agree, we're never going to try and talk anyone off of playing him in any format.
Yeah, and I usually would say, like, I don't like paying up for quarterbacks in cash, and I would usually say a guy like that is good in cash because of how stable he's been. But where his ownership is at right now, yeah, just run him naked in a tournament, and you have the upside there as long as you can find value.
Yeah, look, he has the potential to go 250 passing and 100 rushing. Like it's insane. Yep. And when you have that type of not only ceiling, but also a really high floor on Lamar Jackson, very seldom are you ever going to see this guy finish with like less than 20 fantasy points because he does everything in the offense. I'm never going to try and convince you otherwise. And I'll likely have some naked Lamar in tournaments too. And I very rarely run quarterbacks without pairing them with anyone. I just think, he's an exception. We went into this season comparing him to Josh Allen, not as the same player, but 2 mobile quarterbacks, right, that you could run naked. He is pulled so far ahead of Josh Allen that I have no interest in running solo Josh Allen anymore. If I'm going to do it, it's going to be Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, exactly. Like the upside in Lamar is just so much more there. I am interested to see, Allen has to have one of these spike games coming, and it could have been last week with 2 rushing touchdowns, with just did nothing in the air. But yeah, I completely agree. It's Lamar Jackson, and the Texans' pass rush is just going to continue to get worse. Obviously, no Clowney this entire season, traded to Seattle, but also no J.J. Watt. Every single week, you're going to see that pass rush be worse and worse.
Denver at Minnesota, 40.5 total. Third lowest on the slate. Vikings, 10.5 point favorites, 25.5 point total for them. 15 point implied total for your Denver Broncos. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's dead last on the slate. Behind the Bears, behind the Cardinals, behind the Dolphins, behind the Jets, behind the Bengals. Whew. Yeah, not looking pretty for them against the stout Minnesota defense. Truthfully, though, this is a game, number one, I have a pretty good amount of respect for this Denver Broncos defense. Run defense is a top 10. Pass D, according to Football Outsiders, is 12th. If you look at Pro Football Focus, you got a coverage rating for Denver. I think that where is it? I'm losing it here. Denver, third best in the league. And run defense, Pro Football Focus has them first. So if you're going off PFF, they have them first in run defense, third in pass defense. So while I really don't have much interest in their offensive weapons here with Brandon Allen at the helm, I can't say I'm in love with anyone from the Vikings either, especially given, again, Dalvin Cook's high price point and Christian McCaffrey as a more expensive pivot, but a guy I'd probably just find myself paying up for. Maybe you have a different opinion on this game.
No, I literally have, I do notes for these shows, and the Denver one I have just in bold. I don't want anything from this team, and that's it. That's all I have written for Denver. I get it. People might want to go back to Noah Fant, check Jeff Herman's status. If Herman's back, Font's upside is completely gone. And Font, the only reason he did good when he was kind of chalky or kind of popular in terms of some of the sharp community, he had a 75-yard touchdown run on a couple of just missed tackles. So it's not a spot that I want him. I don't want Sutton with Brandon Allen as the quarterback. So nothing from Denver. Minnesota, if you want to get to Dalvin Cook instead of Zeke, if you're not paying for McCaffrey, I think it's okay, but I personally wouldn't be getting there. You're just betting on opportunity again, and a running back who's shown that he can just catch the ball in any brutal matchup. So definitely game flow independent. He is, though, my third priority behind McCaffrey and Zeke, so I probably don't get much. And it's just it's a negative run blocking advantage. Like you said, I have a lot of respect for Denver's overall defense, especially their run stop in the middle of that line. It's really tough to run up there. So it's Stephon Diggs, and that's the only thing that stands out at all from this slate or from this game. And he's going to get Chris Harris Jr., who in shadow matchups has shut down Allen Robinson, T.Y. Hilton, Devontae Adams. Odell caught 4 balls for 81 yards on him, but one of the catches was for over 45 yards. So it really just came on one play where he made a mistake. Harris Jr. has been one of the better cornerbacks in the entire league. So Diggs stands out a tiny bit just because no Thielen in the volume there. But as a huge favorite, I don't think they'll need him. It's pretty much a wash. Irv Smith Jr., I will say, ran the most snap routes and snaps of his career last game. Might have just been game flow, but he's a punt tight end that he'll probably catch 3 balls if he falls in the end zone. He gets you there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably it for this game, right?
Yeah, this is a really gross game.
It's bad. No question. This is a bad game. But we've got a couple good ones coming up. So let's get to the next one here. That's the New York Jets in Washington. I wouldn't exactly consider this one of the good ones. 38.5 point total. Both teams under 20 implied totals. The Redskins are 1 point favorites at home. This is pretty brutal. You know, Darius Geis will be back. And interim coach Bill Callahan is confident that Geis will get many chances to contribute Sunday against the Jets. Interesting coach speak there. Let's break it down. Adrian Peterson also limited in yesterday's practice. So, of course, Callahan said that Peterson would still be the number 1. So I don't want to, get things twisted here. The whole backfield is a mess.
Yeah, the whole backfield's a mess. Even though there's no C.J. Mosley for the Jets, it's still a really difficult matchup, as you saw last week for Saquon. The only thing the Jets are probably good at on defense right now is stopping the run in terms of swarm tackling to the running back. So, yeah, it's just not a good spot at all. Even if Geis comes in and carries 50% of the workload over AP as long as he's healthy, I still don't feel confident about that because they'll probably see at best like 11 carries each, and that's kind of what the upside here is for Geis, even at the low price point in a difficult matchup. I just don't think there's enough, and nor do I have that much confidence coming off of 3 injuries for this guy.
Yeah.
Just in terms of how often he got re-injured from the same injury. So yeah, it's not a spot where this week I'm wait and see on that. He could really just have 7 carries for like 20 yards, and it's just terrible. So yeah, for Washington, Terry McLaurin should stand out, but he's actually like in theory, this is as good of a spot as it gets. No Jermaine Johnson will track Daryl Roberts' status on the outside, but you saw Darius Slayton just take advantage of this matchup completely last week. But you have Dwayne Haskins throwing the ball. How much confidence do you have in there for an actually decent price in terms of expensive Terry McLaurin for who his quarterback is? It's a shame because if it is Case Keenum, this is a great spot for Terry McLaurin. But if it's Dwayne Haskins, which they've already named the starter, I just don't get there. So Washington side of it, I'm really not getting to anything. Nothing stands out all that much.
Okay. I don't really see anything standing out either. Would you, if you're playing 150 lineups, would you have, how much Terry McLaurin would you have?
Yeah, let me see where he's at right now. I imagine he's not getting as highly owned. Yeah, he's 2% owned. So it's tough. Like Dwayne Haskins has shown nothing. They don't even want him to throw the ball more than like 25 times. If I'm playing 150 lineups, like, I don't know, 6, 7 lineups have Terry McLaurin, even that feels a little bit high.
Yeah, it does. I mean, he's the one guy that can make, some bit of an impact. But the problem is I have no faith in, no faith whatsoever in Dwayne Haskins. So nothing really there. What about on the opposite side with the New York Jets coming off of finally a solid offensive performance? Le'Veon Bell's price point is now above the likes of Josh Jacobs. It has been, but Jacobs has a phenomenal matchup. And he's $200 on DraftKings cheaper than Alvin Kamara. What are you doing with the offense here for the Jets?
Yeah, Bell's the only thing that stands out, and that is current ownership of about 6%. I actually like it. So he's seen in the last 2 weeks 47 total touches, and the big news is that he's seen 12 receptions over that time. He had 4 last week, 8 the week before. After discussing an increase in his role, especially in the receiving game with Adam Gase, he's gotten that through 2 weeks, so hopefully it continues. Washington's run defense is ranked 17th overall. He's 7,200, so yeah, I do prefer Josh Jacobs, but so does the field right now. I even prefer Bell right now to Kamara because of the high ownership on Kamara and some question marks there. So it's a difficult matchup. It's Le'Veon Bell, and that's pretty much it because, yeah, Crowder's been producing, but the price point on Crowder is now up. For a guy who only sees 6.6 air yards per target and 7 targets per game, you need touchdowns for that to survive. So now he has been getting them, so the price comes up, but now you need something that is as variant as a touchdown to continue for Crowder at an increased price point. So tough for me to want to get there in any format. And then Robbie Anderson, yeah, we keep saying the same thing, boom or bust, but this week looks as much boom as ever against the only bright spot on the defense. One of the only bright spots with Terry McLaurin and maybe Adrian Peterson on this team is Quentin Dunbar this season. 52.6 passer rating against him. He only allows 34 yards and 3 receptions per game on average, and I think he'll be seeing a lot of Robbie Anderson.
Okay. Anything prioritized from this game at all?
No, if anything, like interest in Jets defense, but no players.
All right, let's get to a game that actually stands out and we'll have a lot to discuss here. Before we do, though, awesemo.com/join is how you can get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus membership. Go there and use the sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word, get you 50% off your first month of all access Awesemo Plus membership. Ownership projections, player projections, top stack tools, lineup builder, premium Slack, and so much more. And on awesemo.com/join, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see video tutorials on all of the tools, how to use them and what they do, how they can make you a better player. So if you click begin membership too, we'll ask you a quick question. What type of player you are? Serious, professional, hobby, new to all of this. And we'll cater your subscription to fit your needs so you're not getting too much or too little. And you're paying what you feel comfortable with. You can also do an express pass for $3.95 a week. So we got something for everyone. Go to awesemo.com/join. Use the sign-up code NFL Strategy when you do, all one word. All right, New Orleans, Tampa Bay, 50-point over/under. New Orleans Saints, 27.5-point total. They're 5-point favorites on the road, 22.5 points for the Bucs. Let's start with Drew Brees here and break down where we're at on Alvin Kamara. You and I really got into the weeds with this on Tuesday. I think we broke it down really well. If you want to go back, check that show out. It was Tuesday's NFL Strategy Show, taking a first look at the slate. If this game's favorable for New Orleans, I've said on record saying I wouldn't be surprised that the ground game sees split carries, even more than we saw with Kamara and Mark Ingram. The Kamara still, of course, featured in the passing game would be, exclusively, or your exclusive guy there, not Latavius Murray. But I do still have some concerns And Alvin Kamara just hasn't really looked explosive ever since that injury. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, so just looking more into it, going back and seeing how they've started out some other games, we've seen like a 3-3 carry to split kind of to start games for Murray, at least in 2 or 3 of the games I looked at, and Kamara. So based on where the snaps were last week, obviously potentially skewed because of, and definitely skewed upwards, if anything, because of the game flow for Kamara to be on the field and catch the ball more. I think it's fine for Kamara, especially at this price point, to just think that he goes back into a 65% of the snap roll and the splits are the same way. Maybe you get 8 carries for Murray and 14 for Kamara, somewhere around there. And then it's just a really tough matchup on the ground. So you get 2 more Alvin Kamara in the receiving game. So I think that's fine with the price point coming down. I thought he would be overlooked because of what happened last week and just being injured and not a lot of talk around him. But right now he's projected as the 3rd highest player owned on the slate. So it's really tough for me to want to prioritize that. I get it because of the price point. I mean, this is a guy who normally is in the 8K range at least. So just because of the matchup and the ownership, I thought it was going to be more of a sneakier play this week, but it just seems like a chalkier play that doesn't seem all that great when you factor in the holes that you can poke in it. So right now, Kamara is not going to be a guy that I have that much volume, definitely below the 25% projected ownership right now.
That ownership, I guess, isn't that surprising just because that price came down so much. The big thing, too, is we have to respect this Tampa Bay Bucks run defense, right? I mean,
Yep.
They've done a very solid job of plugging up any hole.
Including Alvin Kamara. Yeah.
What's that?
They played Kamara. He was 3.5 yards per carry or something against them.
Yeah. They have been really, really good. And, you know, or do we want to pay $7,400 for Kamara to rely on him almost exclusively in the passing game? I'm not saying that's what happens, but I can't go into this matchup assuming that he's going to have a big game on the ground, Sal.
Yeah, exactly. You're relying on him to score touchdowns and to catch a lot of balls to get there. I mean, we have a very decent size sample, at least relative to the NFL, at what has to happen against this Bucs defense for you to have success. And based on like McCaffrey's half of a quarter, you have to catch the ball and get in the end zone. So I'm just not going to get there all that much this week to Kamara, if any, at that ownership.
Yeah, and by the way, for whatever it's worth, if you look at what we've seen from Kamara this season, take that first game out. Take that first game of the season out, and things really look a little bit bleak. He's averaging, 3.3 yards per carry if you remove that first game of the season. Actually, no, you know what? That might be wrong. Here, I'll tell you right now. So 300 yards, take that one out. He's got, 90 carries on the season. So, yeah, it's definitely better than that. He's averaging 4.1. But still, compared to what we've seen from Kamara in the past, that's nowhere near the same production that we'd become accustomed to seeing on the ground. Last year, 4.6 yards per attempt. And I know you'd say, well, you can't eliminate one game. Well, I am doing that because that was the first game of the season. And ever since then, against Atlanta, sure, he had 6 yards per carry, but it was 4 carries. 11 for 31 against Jacksonville, 16 for 62 for 3.9 yards per carry. That was against Tampa Bay. 4.1 yards against Dallas, 4.3 against Seattle, 3.5 against the Rams. He's had some tough matchups in there, but should we be worried about Alvin Kamara and not just the matchup, or do we think he's fine and it's just Tampa Bay's run defense that we'd be more concerned about?
Yeah, I think for me, it's mainly the defense. Like, I think he's fine in his role in this offense. If anything, maybe Latavius Murray's just really great 2 to 3 game sprint when he was out. It gets him like an extra 2 to 3 carries a game. But your offense is overall just more versatile when Kamara's on the field as opposed to Latavius Murray. And it seemed like Kamara just catching 8 balls, running a ton of routes last week was more than healthy. It was something that I was looking for if they would limit him, like Saquon, similar injury for the two of them. Saquon still dealing with that sort of an injury. But we didn't really see any limitations last week. The way that the game flow was played out. He was on the field nonstop running routes. So I think he's fine. I just think that I hate the matchup. The price point makes it a little bit interesting to talk about. And if he scores a touchdown, he probably pays off the price tag. But it's something, if you're gambling on touchdowns, that you're going to lose more times than not.
Okay. Michael Thomas, super expensive, but super productive. You know, really outside of Christian McCaffrey, I don't know there's been a more consistent and reliable weapon from a fantasy standpoint. Do we get to Michael Thomas? And if we're stacking, we're playing Brees, what do we think of Jared Cook here as well, who had double-digit targets last time out, pretty encouraging. Ted Ginn obviously not getting a ton of opportunities. Traquan Smith, the same goes for him. But, Jared Cook coming in around 11% ownership right now. Greg Olsen, who we talked about, at 16%. He's going to have some popularity, but, so is this entire game.
Yeah, so is the entire game. You see Jared Cook priced up to where he has been the highest pretty much since the first couple of weeks when he had a lot of expectations around a 5K price tag on Cook at that time. It seems kind of crazy now, but yeah, I think Jared Cook is okay to get to at the price tag. I'm worried that the price tag is coming up, and now with Traquan Smith back, maybe you start to see more volume go that way. But this offense has just historically used tight ends more than it's used like your wide receiver twos because of Kamara and Michael Thomas being the main fixtures of it. So they just rely a lot more on short passing, and the tight end fits that mold better than a outside wide receiver who goes down the field like Ginn or Traquan Smith. So I think Jared Cook stands out as like the best stacking option right there with Michael Thomas. My theory on this week, though, is you have Michael Thomas at 9,900. Yes, Christian McCaffrey's 10.5, but I don't think there's as many running backs that can beat out McCaffrey even at the price point and make it hurt you compared to wide receivers. Like there's a ton of 7K wide receivers I think can score 25 to 28 points this week. And even if Michael Thomas gets you to a 30-point game, and I know he's done it 2 weeks in a row, but that's still something hard to just think is automatic at this point. Even if he gets you there, what happens if Godwin scores 32? You don't need Michael Thomas. And I know that's just one player, but even in the 5K range of wide receiver, there's guys who can score 24 fantasy points as opposed to running back where you maybe can name like 4 guys you think can go for maybe 5 that can go for like a 28-point game this weekend. So I think there's a lot of opportunity cost in actually rostering Thomas this week. He's at 20% ownership. I think it's fine for what he's been doing, but there's a price on that now, the price tag at almost 10K. I'm probably not going to get to a lot of Michael Thomas, and that usually means I don't get to a lot of the stacks here. So it's worrisome right now for me where I stand on Thursday, just because not having Drew Brees in this matchup of Michael Thomas is so scary. But I just see it as if Thomas doesn't score 35 to 40 on me, I think I can survive more times than not.
I think you can too. And I wouldn't be surprised to see $9,900 Michael Thomas underwhelm. What surprised me is how much his price tag came up. I mean, he shot up $1,600 from 1 week to the next. Very seldom do you see something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And like the big thing that people are going to point to is like the last time he played Tampa Bay, I think he dropped like 40 points. He just had the crazy 182 2-touchdown game. So it's obviously there. I guess what I'm just betting against is that as bad as Tampa Bay is releasing another receiver or releasing another cornerback in Hargraves, is that any other wide receiver on this slate this week that I hopefully roster will just get me somewhere between like 25 and 30 points. And Michael Thomas, even if he goes off, it still doesn't matter because they're $2,000 cheaper in matching him at that point. So it's a scary somewhat of a fade, but when you factor in price, you're getting literally $2,500 more to roster guys with similar upside, in my opinion.
We talked about Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore on Tuesday, and how this would make for a very good spot for Godwin in the event that Lattimore is healthy. We got the first week 11 injury report yesterday, and Marshawn Lattimore. Let me pull it up here. He didn't participate with that hamstring injury, so I don't know, man. If he's out, this changes a lot, and then I'd feel a lot more comfortable stacking Winston with Godwin and Mike Evans, because eventually both of these guys are going to have a big game in the same game. What are you thinking here, and do you agree that Lattimore's status is huge as far as how we approach this?
Yeah, it's huge. Like either way, right now I have a lot of interest in Jameis Winston, where he is and some of the pricing on his team. But yeah, if Lattimore's out, it only helps Winston because it just literally frees up Mike Evans. He was goose-egged on 3 targets earlier this season. In the past 2 years, that has been much of the same, just Marshawn Lattimore beating Mike Evans in matchups. We saw earlier this season Chris Godwin just torment PJ Williams. He did it last year in the first week of the season when he was still kind of behind Deshaun Jackson and even Adam Humphries for 30 yards and a touchdown in that game against PJ Williams. So he's had success there. Obviously, earlier this year, there's a little bit more confidence in that, just went off for 2 touchdowns. So right now, I prioritize it as Godwin over Evans. But if indeed Evans opens up because of no Lattimore, you could take your stab on whichever one of those guys you want. They'll both have great matchups. Evans will probably get a lot of Eli Apple, which is absolutely fine for Mike Evans' matchup. So getting to both of them is expensive, and then running it back, you probably can't afford at all then on Mike Thomas. So that's where the Jared Cooks, the Traquan Smiths. I prefer Smith over Ted Ginn. He ran more routes and played more snaps in his first game back. So at a cheaper price tag, I'll take that and hope that it sustains. But the main thing here for me is Godwin. No matter what, I'm probably going to have a lot of Godwin. And I do like OJ Howard. He ran a season high 41 routes. Can that completely flop back to 25? Yes. And that's the concern there. But you need somewhere else on this team if you're not going to stack these two. And you have a lot of interest in Winston, like I do, to get to. And I do have some confidence, especially around the red zone still, in OJ Howard if he's going to run anywhere near these many routes this coming week.
I mean, you could definitely do worse than OJ Howard, and that's really all the analysis needed, right? It's a bad position. Like Greg Olsen is no guarantee. Jared Cook is no guarantee. It's not the opportunity cost is not very high at tight end this week.
Yeah, we saw the Teddy Bridgewater week where Jared Cook was in the winning lineup. It might have been against Tampa earlier this season with Michael Thomas going off. We saw that game, and Jared Cook had like 12 or 13 fantasy points in that game. So you can win tournaments because the tight end position is just so bad every single week for the most part, with the tight end getting you like 12 or 13 points.
All right. Hey, enjoy the show. Hit us with a thumbs up, like the video, help us out here. It does do a lot for us, and we greatly appreciate it. Helps us continue to keep putting out free content here on YouTube. Subscribe and hit that notification bell as well so you always know when new content's going to drop next. Any thoughts on Ronald Jones this week now that his price has come up a bit? In a very tough matchup, might I add. And I don't think – sorry, I personally don't see him – hauling in another 8 receptions on 8 targets. That to me, despite everything Bruce Arians has said, still feels like a pretty significant outlier.
Yeah, definitely an outlier. He had 8 catches coming into that game, and then he catches all 8 of the targets in that game. Yeah, so I went back and looked at the catches, though. There were design plays for him, but 5 out of the 8 were pretty much just dump-offs where usually he probably doesn't get them, so it's encouraging. But he didn't play a crazy amount of snaps once again. He played, I think, right up there in the high 40s or right around 50 once again. So it's not a spot that I think it's going to repeat. Definitely an outlier, not something in this matchup that I'm going to go to. It's really just a passing game.
He actually played fewer snaps this week than last week.
Yeah, and that's what happened. So he led the team in snaps earlier this season at like 49%. The next week, they all pretty much had exactly the same amount of snaps.
34, 33% for everyone.
Yeah, and that like pretty much happened again this past week with Barber.
Yep. Anything else on this one?
No, that's it. I guess, yeah, Traquan over Ted Ginn for some people asking. That's where I would go.
Okay. Arizona, San Francisco. This game's pretty ugly, man. There are definitely some elements from it that we like, or at least that I like. And I think there's going to be some value, but as a whole, this is not a very appealing game. 45-point over under. San Francisco is a 28-point total, though. They're 11-point favorites. Arizona's 17-point implied total is third lowest on the slate, ahead of only Denver and Chicago. The big thing here is Breed is expected to miss time dealing with that ankle injury, which tells us that. And by the way, Raheem Mostert is also limited, has been limited in practice. Tevin Coleman really does stand out as someone that you have to think gets a ton of opportunities here. I'm really not that involved in the passing game. George Kittle, doubtful to play once again. He hasn't officially been ruled out, but it's looking bleak. Emmanuel Sanders didn't practice on Wednesday. They're still big-time favorites. I don't see how this game isn't featuring Tevin Coleman early and often. What about you?
Yeah, Tevin Coleman's one that stands out. I imagine his ownership comes up at single digits once Breed is officially ruled out. Breed, they're saying expected to miss 1 to 2 weeks now. So, yeah, Tevin Coleman's the guy there. I think you could project him for, even if Mostert does come in and play, like 65% of the snaps, they don't really like to let a guy break free. But even that at a bottom number for how big of a favorite they are, and they might run 35 times in this game, I think I feel good about Coleman touching the ball 18 plus times in this one, more times than not. So it's a nice spot as just really the primary piece of this offense. If Mostert does play, it's really tough to want to play a guy that's seeing 35% of the snaps, but at the price tag, it could just be a GPP Millie Maker type flyer play. If even at that price tag, he could still see like 12, 15 touches in this game by the way that San Fran likes to run their offense when they're ahead. So Coleman's the priority. I agree. I really don't want Deebo Samuel after the big game. He had a big game, and so did Bourne had a nice game where Jimmy G threw 46 times. Jimmy G's probably going to throw 30, 28 times in this game. So you're literally going to cut that production by like a third, if not more. So it's not a spot that I'll get to either of those guys, even at cheaper price tags. Deebo's the one that stands out, if anything, but even as a number one receiver, game time decision, Emmanuel Sanders, I actually like that less if Emmanuel Sanders misses for Samuel.
Yeah, I mean, dude, outside of last week, Garoppolo's been averaging 28 pass attempts per game.
Yep.
That's a tough one, man. But who did you say Wilson, or who did you say could be the 12 carry guy?
Mostert. Most start.
Oh, Mostert. Okay. Yeah. I guess we'll assume that he's going to play
Yeah.
because he's always on the injury report. Yeah, I actually don't disagree with that at all. He's really cheap. Could you see a situation where Mostert gets 15 carries and Tevin Coleman gets like 23? Honestly, I think you can.
And Mostert will catch like 3 or 4 balls probably.
Yeah, I agree. Very, very interesting spot there. And you have to think that with all of these like mid 4K running backs, many of whom have very low floors. I mean, very low floors. Even a guy in Jordan Howard, who we'll talk about, I do have interest in him, but very low floor because he doesn't have pass catching upside. McKissick, I know he can catch passes, but I'm not going to pretend that he's got a 12-point floor. Kalen Balaj being another one of them. The list goes on. It's not crazy to think that you take, $1,200, $1,300 discount on Mostert, assuming Breida's not going to play. And just assume that, hey, you know what? Maybe they run the ball 39 times again.
Yeah, I mean, he's right now like less than 0.5% owned. He's not going to be owned at all. So if you get 5% of Raheem Mostert, your level's above the field if he happens to have like a 15-point day because he gets in the end zone. I mean, he's a very productive player when he touches the ball. He's also very injury prone when he touches the ball. So it's a spot where Tevin Coleman's a priority here, and Mostert's just sort of a punt Millie Maker type play that you could have 2 of in your lineup and you're outweighing the field by a ton.
Yeah, I might have more than that. Would you consider at all playing them both in the same lineup in tournaments?
Yeah, I know that's what somebody's probably going to say. I'll say no to that one, just because I think Mostert's upside the most comes from big plays and big touchdowns, which I imagine cuts into, at least in theory, Coleman. Like you can get what you just said, 24 touches for one, 12 to 15 for the other, and Mostert needs like 15 points to be GPP viable at that price tag. So I think it can work for both of them by how much they run. We've seen it work out before, but mainly on like showdown slates where there's limited other people to go to. So I'll just say I don't want to do that, but I think it could work.
Yeah, it's still capping upside for sure. But here's the thing. No team is attempting more runs per game than the Niners. 37 rushing attempts per game. So my assumption here, and we can move on, but my assumption here, Sal, is Wilson probably active because he was a coach's decision inactive last game. Maybe spells these guys, sees a couple of attempts. Juszczyk is not a guy that is ever going to get rushing attempts. He has 1 on the year, and he returned to action last week. Like, it seems that, we pretty much covered it, but Coleman and Mostert could get really, really, really big time opportunities, and mostly Coleman, but you're paying nothing for Mostert. So a guy to definitely keep an eye on. On the other side, speaking of run games, I'm writing off Arizona's run game, even if Edmonds is out against San Francisco. I know Kenyon Drake on that Thursday night football game had a solid effort in his debut with Arizona, but David Johnson was out. They had no other options. I have no interest in this team. Even the passing game to me is hard to get to. What about you?
Yeah, I don't want anything here. Kyler Murray is a very, very poor man's Russell Wilson, and he's not going to be able to do what Russell Wilson did in that game the other night against San Fran. So the only thing that stands out a little bit, and I don't want it, but just to make note of something, is Christian Kirk played a lot more on the outside last week. He scored 2 of his 3 touchdowns on the outside, and he actually looked really good. For this matchup, though, it's absolutely brutal against Sherman, who has the best pass rating against in the league, and Emmanuel Mosley, who is not giving up much more, 79 pass rating against. So it's brutal for everybody here. And like you said, if you have like David Johnson in your season long, that has to be brutal one, but like you probably can't trade him, and you don't want to drop him at this point because you drafted him so high, but he's as good as whatever's on your waiver wire at this point.
Dude, he's literally, I said this earlier, he literally is dead last in breakaway percentage, which is really a crazy thing or no, you know what? Is it breakaway or is it elusive? Elusiveness would be even worse. Elusiveness. Yeah. He's dead last in elusiveness,
That's the guy that was leading in that. Yeah.
That's crazy, right? Like, I don't know.
He was like, when that stat started to come around, but like in his prime, whatever it was, like his big season 3-4 years ago, he was like the reason that stat was like so pumped up because of how good he was in the category.
Yep. I don't know what's happened to him. And I don't think it's just the offense. I don't think it's just the offensive line. David Johnson does not look like himself. So it is what it is. Anything else for this one?
No, not much at all. It's just really the San Fran running game.
Okay. Oakland and Cincy. This game's a fun one. 50 point, or no, you know what? Did it come down? It must have come down. 48.5 came down a point. 10.5 point favorites are the Oakland Raiders. 29.5 total, 19 for the Bengals. That 29.5 point total is the highest of any game played this week. They're big time favorites. I've said it to you a couple times already. I said it to Chris Spags on yesterday's show. I absolutely love Josh Jacobs here, and I honestly don't even care about his ownership.
Yeah, I like Josh Jacobs at the price point. It's hard to ignore. What is he right now? 6,500. He should probably never be that cheap. Or 6,900. He should never be that cheap at this type of a matchup with how bad in every single category against running backs since he has been this year. I mean, rushing yards per game, they're the worst in the league. It depends what you want to look at, but in terms of how many rushing yards they've given up, obviously up there as well. Attempts against them, it's all up there. Fantasy points per game allowed, second highest. So it's a really good matchup for Josh Jacobs. The only thing, if to poke a hole in him that's worrisome, is he still doesn't run a ton of routes. Like, it's still Jalen Richard. So you don't expect this game to get out of hand. But for a guy that you would like to get there in other ways, if he's not getting in the end zone, it could be somewhat like, and I don't think it's anywhere close because he's much better, but David Montgomery last week in terms of just if the guy's not going to catch any balls and not going in the end zone, it could really hurt you. But with that said, it's a much better matchup for a much better running back this season in the rookie Jacobs over Montgomery. So I personally like where the ownership's at right now in terms of it's not high enough for me to want to say, okay, this is really bad at 25%. I feel good being at like a third of my lineups with Josh Jacobs, if not more.
Yeah, there are a few guys that I'm willing to play, and your point is well taken. But there are a few guys in the league that are not capable pass catchers, or at least not featured. Because I actually think Jacobs is very capable as a pass catcher, just isn't used very often. That I'm willing to play. One of them is Derrick Henry. In favorable game scripts, they're just going to feed him. He's going to see pretty much every opportunity inside the 10-yard line. And I feel pretty similarly about Josh Jacobs. I think in this game, unless somehow the Bengals put points up on them early, even if they did, I don't see how you get away from Josh Jacobs here, knowing that there's no way Cincinnati sustains that throughout the course of the game. Jacobs, 7 red zone looks, 1, 9, 3 last week, 8. He's had a ton of opportunities in the red zone. I expect that to continue. There's no Here's the one thing. While you mentioned, of course, there's not a lot of upside in the passing game, there's also absolutely no competition in the backfield for rushing attempts.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's getting 21 opportunities per game total, almost 20 on the ground alone. So yeah. And like the other huge difference is Oakland's offense this year has been just completely transformed and really good.
They look great.
Yeah, they look fantastic. Carr looks good. And compared to like the David Montgomery comparison where that offense is just abysmal. So yeah, Jacobs has the upside for sure. And the thing that stands out the most is, as a rookie on this slate, at least, he leads the slate in time spent behind the line of scrimmage in terms of being very decisive, which you usually don't see out of a lot of rookies, hitting their holes and being just decisive in that regard, and also able to break tackles. So only a 14% stuff percentage. That's usually going to happen when you're not staying behind the line of scrimmage. So he's always getting positive yardage, which more times than not, even if he's only getting an extra yard or two out of it, you're also going to hit the hole quicker than it's closing. So a guy like Jacobs has the upside, and we've seen it nonstop. This guy has bursts. So I like him. I like that the price point where it is right now. So the ownership is fine on it. I wish it was a little bit lower, but you're not going to get that in today's DFS with all the content out there.
If you want the opposite of that, look at Miles Sanders. Like, all the talent in the world, but so indecisive that the hole's there. He doesn't see it. It closes up, and he gets swallowed up behind the line of scrimmage. Although it seems like he's made some adjustments lately. Is it crazy or what, though, that over their last 6 games, the Raiders are averaging 26.6 points per game?
It's crazy. I mean, it's really good at what this team has done, especially with, I mean, Tyrell Williams was out half of those games. Like, they were doing it with Trevor Davis as their number 1 receiver, and obviously Waller's out there, but really good. I mean, Derek Carr, a couple of his interceptions have been deflected, but he has been just extremely, like, what is he at? Is he had 4 interceptions on the season, and 2 of them were deflections, I believe? Like, he's been very good at just not making mistakes and getting the ball out quicker this year.
14-4 touchdown to interception ratio.
Yeah, he's been very solid. And a lot of it, I mean, your defense is so bad, you're just forced to throw more, but they've been better, well more designed with Gruden there.
And these point totals aren't skewed either from one big game. You've got a 26, a 31, a 24, a 24, a 24, a 31 in a row.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
They've been very solid.
So we like Jacobs, no doubt. What about Waller and Williams?
Yeah, I think Waller is just the best tight end play on the board. And seeing the ownership this morning, it's following that. It's just you have overpriced tight ends, and Kittle's probably not going to play. And then you have overpriced tight ends in the regard of Mark Andrews, Zach Ertz around him in a really tough matchup. So for me, it's almost similar to last week where there's like 1 to 2 guys to pay up for, and then you're just naturally punting because of the slate. So it's Darren Waller stands out amongst the rest. And yeah, it's a spot that I like getting to. I'm not against stacking it. They're such huge favorites that I much prefer Josh Jacobs, but this is a really good matchup. I think Carr's in a fine spot. All these guys are highly owned, so you could play Jacobs and Waller together. I'm not worried about that. They're pretty much the entire offense. I've done it before this year. They have just so much volume on their own rights that they could both be sustainable without playing Carr. So it's really Waller and Jacobs. I like Tyrell Williams, but he just relies so much on low volume. Like he's going to see 5 targets in this game and you need the big play out of him. BW Webb has been forced to move out of the slot out to the outside because of injuries to Drake Kirkpatrick and some other guys in the Bengals secondary. So it's a good matchup for Williams. It's just a matter of, can he hit a big play? That's what you're relying on mainly from him. He just doesn't see a ton of volume as of late.
Exact question I asked Chris Spags yesterday was, are you willing, because I'm not huge on Derek Carr because I don't want to play him with Josh Jacobs.
Yeah.
But I am okay playing Jacobs with Waller. And like you said, they're not dependent on Derek Carr. And well, really, I don't see them hurting each other. Now, of course, if Jacobs scores, Waller isn't scoring. But, you have to presuppose at least that Oakland is going to put enough points on the board. And where are those points going to come from? I think it's fair to say that this is also a kind of heavily concentrated offense when Tyrell Williams is back.
Yeah, it's very heavily concentrated. And even with Williams out there, like he's clearly their best receiver on the outside and he's very good, but he just doesn't soak up a ton of target share. So it's not like he's getting 8 to 9 targets and you're just hoping that Waller sees 5. Like Waller's still going to go out there more times than not and as a minimum see 5 or 6. So it's just a spot where I look at it and I say he's a huge favorite in Derek Carr. So I don't think there's really upside in totally rostering him in a stack. And if you just look at his numbers, he's been solid, but fantasy wise, I don't think he wins you a tournament in any of his starts if you just take him and put him on a team. So this season in DFS. So I think that Jacobs is clearly doesn't need Derek Carr in terms of correlation. So he's fine. And then if you're telling me that you're going to get Derek Carr throwing the ball like 30 times in this game, well then, yeah, you're going to see 6-7 targets to Waller. So why can't they kind of both survive together? I think they can.
It's kind of crazy. Josh Jacobs, and when I say red zone looks, that's carries and targets. Josh Jacobs has 35 red zone looks. No one else has more than 7 this year. So, of course, I know it's crazy right now. Like I said, though, of course, with your wide receivers and tight ends, you're only looking at targets. I get that. But it's still, there are plenty of teams that don't feature their running back nearly as much in the red zone. Like these are Ezekiel Elliott type red zone numbers. Dalvin Cook only has 38 red zone attempts. Alexander Mattison has 23. You see what I'm saying here? There's certainly a lot of opportunity. I'll do you one better. Derrick Henry has 24. And a lot of that's because Tennessee isn't in the red zone as much. But when you basically have a similar role to a guy like Henry and you've got 11 more opportunities in the red zone and you're the same price that we get Henry at each week, yeah, it's a very concentrated offense and I like it. All right, so Cincinnati, Sal, I said to you before the show, I'm trying to decide if I want to get some Ryan Finley in some lineups. And I know it sounds crazy, right? I get it. But the thing about Oakland is they're going to score. Like, I don't see any way this Oakland team doesn't put points up. Their pass defense is really bad. Is it bad enough to where Finley can actually produce? They're 29th according to Football Outsiders in pass defense DVOA. Pro Football Focus has them at 27th. This is an Oakland team that ranks 20 or 31st in tackling this season. I go across the board. Run defense has been the one somewhat decent spot, and they're still towards the bottom of the league. Like, their offense is what's carried them. And while I mentioned the point totals that we've seen, what about the point totals against? And then you can take over 24, 24, 27, 42, 21, 24, 34, 28, 16. That's the amount of points the Oakland Raiders have given up this season.
Yeah, they're clearly terrible on defense, and all those numbers you pointed out just speak to it. My only concern, like if this was Jeff Driscoll, I honestly probably would be okay with it, but it's just like that it's Ryan Finley. I mean,
Yeah.
in last game,
And
yards
Mixon had
percent.
30 carries last week
Yeah,
in a
that's the
game
other
where they
thing.
were
Like,
down by 100.
so yeah, exactly. They just kept running in the ball, and a game where Gio Bernard played the second half, even though everywhere reported that he was out. And then I went back and saw him running, and I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at. But you had Finley just attempt 5.6 yards per attempt, and it's not even like it was just that game because of a difficult matchup. Sure, the Ravens secondary, but you also had like the entire preseason with Finley looking good relative to just fantasy scoring and numbers. He was still attempting like 6 yards per attempt in the preseason. This is just a guy who doesn't throw downfield. You're likely not to have AJ Green maybe for the whole season. So like Auden Tate is your best weapon downfield. Last week, they only threw it to pretty much Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon on the short passes as their two leading receivers. So as a one-off and a run back option, if you wanted to stack, but as a one-off, I really like Tyler Boyd here in this matchup for sure against LaMarcus Joyner, but I'm probably not going to get to Finley. I understand your reasoning, and also the price point is so cheap, and everybody's really had their way with this Oakland secondary. So it does sound crazy, like you said, but it's also not the craziest thing when you break it down with the thinking of like the low ownership play and whatever else comes along with it. But yeah, I think Tyler Boyd stands out. Mixon also stands out. He ran 14 routes to Gio's 7. Gio left for a little bit with an injury, but not nearly as much as people think that he did. So I like Boyd here the most, and then it's really hard to get the Mixon with all the value running backs, but seeing 30 rush attempts last week, it leads me to believe that no matter what, the guy's going to carry the ball like 16 to 18 times.
Do you think it's possible that that Mixon does get another? Like, what do you think was? I find this interesting, of course, because they were playing with a massive deficit, right? What do you think Zach Taylor was thinking? Was it, I don't want to completely destroy Ryan Finley's confidence? Like, you never know. That could be it. Was it like the only real opportunity to move the ball would be with Joe Mixon? Do you remember the last time you've seen a running back get 30 carries in a game they lost by 36?
No, I don't. But so I take like game by game notes. I look at like their accelerated film stuff. And pretty much the thing that I pointed out was Finley in this game had a fumble 6 and a pick 6. And then in the fourth quarter, it was when RG3 came in. Like Lamar Jackson didn't play the fourth quarter. That's how bad this got. And Mixon ended up having like a third of his carries in the fourth quarter alone. So a lot of it was just they knew they were done. They were down 36. Well, at that point, down like 30. And then another fumble 6 happens from Finley. And at that point, they just handed off the ball nonstop to Mixon at the end of the game. So it's skewed from that. He still would have had like 18 to 20 carries in this game, but just heavily skewed from the quarterback. And Finley literally resulted in 12 points for the other team, 14 points with the extra points. And then at that point, they were just like, we're just going to hand the ball. If that's what I got from just watching the game on a recap afterwards. And then also Gio Bernard gets hurt for like 2 series. So he probably picks up 2 or 3 carries there. It was just a lot of things that went in Mixon's favor. I do think like he carries the ball 16 to 18 times, even if they're down, but 30 was just a huge difference from being blown out in the fourth quarter, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're right. What's also interesting, though, is if you're talking about a team a defense that gives up like a very high yards per attempt number, Oakland is one of those teams. So it's like something has to give here, and it's probably Finley makes Oakland look good. But I do think there is merit to saying, you know what? Running some of these Bengal receivers, and this is the point that I wanted to arrive at, and you pretty much took us there already. Running out some of these Cincinnati Bengals receivers as one-offs, all of them at discounts, particularly Boyd and Auden Tate, that actually to me makes a lot of sense this week.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think Boyd stands out the most, just fits the build running out of the slot still against LaMarcus Joyner. So a good matchup, 104 passer rating against Joyner this season. So pretty bad overall, but you have Boyd caught 6 balls for, I think 61 yards last week. Finley's just going to throw the ball short primarily. Like he'll take shots downfield, but like 85, 90% of the time, if not more, it's going to be less than 10 yards. And that's just where Tyler Boyd's going to live.
That's right. Looking at yards per completion, I'm pretty sure Oakland is like either worst or second worst in the league. Third worst behind the Bengals and the Giants. So we'll see. I like Tate though, and I like Boyd. Anything else from this game?
No, that's it. I think that, it's really just Boyd from that side of it and Tate for sure a little bit. They're just going to have good matchups on the outside, even with a bad quarterback.
Let's close it out. Philadelphia, New England Patriots. So Alshon Jeffrey might not play this week, and he didn't practice yesterday. this could be really ugly. You have a really great Patriots D secondary, and sure, Alshon would have seen Stephon Gilmore, but at least he would have taken Gilmore away from things. Now you're going to have like Nelson Aguilar, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Mack Hollins, Jordan Matthews, who they just signed. Like, this could be really, really bad. And I've told you, I think Jordan Howard is their only chance. The run game. I believe this. The run game is the only chance the Eagles have of keeping this game competitive. So if I'm going to take shots, it's going to be on Howard or Sanders because I don't see any other way they move the ball efficiently against the Patriots. But again, this game could get out of hand. Jeffrey has not had a great season, but not having him on the field gives Carson, I mean, you got to give Carson Wentz, you got to cut him some slack here, Sal, because he's been working with, arguably the worst pass catching core in the entire league all season long, because you can just take Ertz out of the game and double him when Mack Hollins doesn't have a single catch, and Aguilar has been terrible. Looks like he doesn't even want to catch footballs.
Yeah, and Alshon's a shell of himself. Like, I actually think from what they've been working with that, like, Carson Wentz is probably like number 5 or 6 in the MVP voting, in my opinion. He might actually be there in odds just from the players that actually aren't up there because a lot of the good teams are relying on defense. But anyways, like I think Wentz has been a lot better than people would expect this season. For the
so many drop passes too. It's absurd.
Yeah, so many drop passes as well. I mean, Aguilar like 2 games worth of or 2 touchdowns worth of drops passes alone. But yeah, it's just Jordan Howard as a 1% pivot from all those other guys like we were talking about earlier in the Brian Hills, and it's actually a decent spot for Howard in a game where they're only 3-point spread. It's only a 3-point spread difference as an underdog, averaging, or he's had 42 carries, like you said, the last couple of weeks here. So since Doug Peterson said he would be the guy, out-touched Sanders 19-10 last week on the ground. So you're going to see good volume, and you probably need touchdowns for it to pay off, but you probably need that from those other guys as well at no ownership at all. I honestly think Jordan Howard is just as good of a play as Brian Hill, but he's 24% owned or less owned. Like, there's not much difference to me from Brian Hill to Jordan Howard, except like people think the Patriots are so much better on the ground, but really they're ranked right now 24th overall in run defense. So they just don't allow teams to run against them. But if this game's going to stay close, like Vegas says, and it's a closer spread than Brian Hill has, I should let you know that 6-point underdog for Atlanta. I actually like Jordan Howard just straight up more than Brian Hill, let alone the ownership on it. Me
too. And I'm sure I'll take some heat for this because I'm sure I'll take some heat if he sucks because I've talked about him a lot this week. But there's really no other way that they're going to produce. There isn't. Unless Doug Peterson and Mike Groh, who stinks as offensive coordinator, come out and do something creative, which I don't expect to be the case. You gotta pound the ball on the ground and hope that you can. You just have to hope that you can, lead this game in time of possession and keep the ball out of Brady's hands. Otherwise, it's not going to work for them. They're going to have to find ways to move the ball on the ground. And I do think they can do that. But I guess we'll find out. Jordan Howard, by the way, was limited in practice yesterday, but I'm assuming that he's probably going to be okay. He had a bye week to deal with it, so I think he's fine. All right, let's close it out with the Pats. Mohamed Sanu, coming off of a 14-target, 10-reception, 81 yards, and a touchdown game against Baltimore in his, I believe that was his second game with the Patriots, right? Or was that his first? Yeah, the first game he was like somewhat limited in routes. Yeah. Last game he was his full game. And Julian Edelman, another double-digit target game. That makes 4 in a row with 10-plus targets, 11-plus targets, as a matter of fact, for Julian Edelman. You've got guys like Philip Dorsett, who are scarcely used, but he's out there. And then, of course, James White, who every single week is pretty heavily involved and is used in the red zone. Sonny Michele, of course, to close this one out. Just a shell of what he was last year, and I don't know what to make of him anymore. The big thing is that he probably gets a lot of opportunities if this game is close because even though he's averaging like 1 yard per attempt, Sonny Michele is still getting a lot of work. He's $4,900. All right, sum it up for us, Sal. Yeah, so I actually think Brady's interesting here. I just don't prioritize him over other guys, though. But he has 2 clear stacking options, if not a third, if you want to say Dorsett. But I think Julian Edelman's in a really good spot this week. I've grown to like him a lot more as the week has gone on. He's going to get Maddox, probably. Avonte Maddox has been playing the slot for the Eagles. So far this year, 113 pass rating against, has not been just primarily there the whole season, had to move to the outside due to some injuries. But when he's been in the slot,
in the slot this season, 16 receptions for 186 yards and a touchdown. Doesn't seem like crazy numbers, but again, it's limited numbers in the slot. So the passer rating again should just show you he has not been good there. So Edelman stands out. Mohamed Sanu at his price point stands out. Probably gets a mixture of Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills. And that's a fine price point for Sanu if he's going to be seeing 7 or 8 targets at the price point that he's at and red zone upside. So I think Brady is an interesting, just lower end type of stack with these Patriots. Like, we know the secondary for the Eagles has been bad, but it's also been improved as they've had guys get healthier and just return for a year of injuries for the most part. So yeah, nothing really stands out from this game on the whole. I think James White is just priced up too much to where I don't think he's a viable pivot in the mid 5K range. Like, James White, to me at this point, based on how much he's used on the ground, is pretty much just like an overpriced slot wide receiver. Yeah. You get like your 6 or 7 targets from him, 1 or 2 carries, but he's 5,400. So it's just Edelman and Sanu as probably one-offs more times than not.
I have trouble getting the White every week. I think you have a limited ceiling and the floor is okay, but the range of outcomes for White is what, like 10, 15 fantasy points, it feels like every week.
Exactly.
He's never going to kill you, but it's hard for me to get there. Like you said, you're not getting him ever really at a significant discount, or even, I think, reasonably priced. I don't need to get there either. Yeah, Sanu, Edelman, Brady, I'm perfectly fine with. Philadelphia's fixed the secondary up a little bit, but still not good. That'll do it for us, though. As always, not bad. Hour and a half, 11 games seems to be par for the course at this point. Tell us where they can find you at, Sal.
You can find me on Twitter at SalVetriDFS, and I'll be back on Osmo YouTube channel with Chris Randone Saturday at 11 a.m. And then I have my own YouTube channel where I do fantasy sports as well. It's just my name, Sal Vetri.
Follow me, Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D. Get on that right after the show. Go ahead over to Twitter. Follow us. And Osmo at Osmo_com. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the strategy show, lineup building. And then Saturday, Sal will be back with Chris Randone for your final tune-up heading into week 11. We'll catch you back here next time on the strategy show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports.